welcome back. Or if this is your first night here, welcome to Sleepy Voyage. The day has been long, longer than some days have the right to be. Exhaustion settles in strange places, doesn't it? In the tightness across your back, in the heaviness your eyelids carry. You don't need to apologize for feeling worn down. There's no shame in being tired, only understanding, only a quiet place to finally rest. Tonight, a refuge waits in the stillness of winter. A place where snow falls without sound, where stone walls hold warmth close, where the world outside grows quiet and distant. A manor stands in a valley, wrapped in white, and within its walls, small dramas unfold with the gentleness of falling snow. Nothing urgent, nothing harsh, only the soft rhythm of a house breathing through a winter's day. Before we begin our journey to Oakwood Manor, consider making this place your own. By subscribing to this channel, you ensure this refuge will always be here, waiting for you on the difficult nights. When the world grows too loud, when rest feels impossible, this space remains. If tonight's story brings you peace, your quiet support helps keep these doors open. There is no pressure, only an invitation to return whenever you need. And now, let the day fall away. Let everything that happened before this moment fade into the distance. The manor is there, in the valley, beneath endless falling snow. The journey begins. The valley lay beneath a blanket of white that seemed to have no beginning and no end. Snow had been falling for 3 days without pause, each flake descending in perfect silence, adding to the depth that already muffled every sound, every sharp edge, every hurried thing. The landscape had become a study in softness. Hills rolled in gentle white curves. Trees stood dark against the pale expanse, their branches heavy with accumulation, bowing slightly as if in reverence to the weight they carried. At the valley's heart, Oakwood Manor rose from the snow like something that had always been there and always would be. Stone walls, weathered to a deep grey that spoke of centuries, held their ground against the cold. The structure was substantial without being imposing. 3 stories of mullioned windows, gabled roofs steep enough to shed snow, and chimneys from which smoke rose in steady columns. Light glowed amber in several windows, warm against the blue-white of afternoon snowlight. The manor seemed to exist in its own pocket of time, removed from the rushing world, held in winter's patient embrace. Around the manor, the gardens slept beneath their white covering. What had been manicured hedges now appeared as soft mounds. The fountain in the circular drive stood silent, its basin filled with fresh snow, its cherub statue wearing a thick white cap. The long driveway curved away toward distant gates, its path marked only by the parallel lines of stone pillars that emerged from the snow at regular intervals, marching toward a world that felt very far away. And inside those stone walls, morning was just beginning to stir. Something was about to shift the quiet rhythm of the house. Not dramatically, not urgently, but shift it would in the way that small disruptions can ripple through a place, touching everyone within, asking them all to pause and adjust and find their way back to center. The manor held its breath, waiting for the day to truly begin. The first signs of waking came from below stairs, where the kitchen already hummed with low activity. Mrs. Gable, the cook, moved through her domain with the confidence of 30 years in the same position. Her hands, flour-dusted and capable, shaped dough for the morning's bread while her mind ran through the day's menu. The kitchen was warm, almost too warm, heated by the great iron stove that never fully cooled. Copper pots hung overhead, catching the lamplight. The scent of rising yeast mingled with the sharper notes of tea steeping in a massive pot. Mr. Belvedere, the butler, descended the back stairs with his usual measured tread. His morning ritual never varied. First, check that fires had been laid in the family rooms. Second, ensure the silver tea service was polished. Third, prepare the morning tray for Sir Arthur, who would wake precisely at 7 and expect his Earl Grey at 7:15. The rhythm of the house depended on these small certainties. Belvedere found comfort in that dependability. In a world that seemed to spin faster each year, Oakwood Manor held to its routines like an anchor to the seabed. In the scullery, young Thomas, one of the footmen, pumped water into the great copper boiler. His breath made small clouds in the cold air near the back door. Outside the window, snow continued its quiet descent. He paused to watch it for a moment, losing himself in the hypnotic fall. Each flake caught light as it passed the window, a tiny moment of brightness before joining the accumulated depth below. Upstairs, in the family quarters, Lady Eleanor Sterling drifted in that space between sleep and waking. The bed was warm, piled high with quilts and a thick eiderdown that cocooned her in perfect comfort. Beyond the heavy curtains, pale light suggested morning, but it was the muted light of snow, soft and indirect. There was no urgency to rise. Not yet. The house was quiet above the level of the servants' work. She could hear nothing from this distance, except perhaps the faintest suggestion of activity, more a feeling than a sound. She pulled the covers closer and allowed herself a few more minutes in that borderland where dreams still whispered at the edges of thought. In the adjoining dressing room, Sir Arthur Sterling's valet, Mr. Pennyworth, laid out the day's clothes with precise care. Grey wool trousers, a crisp white shirt, a burgundy waistcoat, the morning coat in charcoal. Everything arranged in the order it would be needed. Pennyworth had served Sir Arthur for 20 years and knew his preferences down to the smallest detail. The scent of bergamot from the Earl Grey drifted up from below, a signal that tea was ready. In moments, he would wake Sir Arthur with the gentle words he used each morning, the same words, spoken in the same tone. Another small certainty in the manor's careful rhythm. Down the hall, in the nursery wing, Miss Prim, the governess, stood at the window watching the snow accumulate on the sill. Behind her, in their beds, Thomas and Alice Sterling still slept. The children, ages 8 and 10, had stayed up late the night before, watching the snow by lamplight, their faces pressed to the cold glass in wonder. Now they slept deeply, their breathing soft and synchronized in that way siblings sometimes achieve. Miss Prim knew that once they woke, their energy would fill the entire upper floor. They would want to go out into the snow, to build, to throw, to run. She would need to channel that energy carefully. Perhaps a project, perhaps igloo construction under her watchful eye. Something to burn off the restlessness that 3 days of snowfall had created. The manor settled into its morning rhythm. Fires were lit in the drawing room, the library, the breakfast room. The warmth spread gradually through the cold stone, chasing away the night's chill. In the entrance hall, the grandfather clock marked 7:15 with its deep, sonorous chime. The sound carried through the house, a signal everyone understood. Morning had officially begun. Sir Arthur descended the main staircase at precisely 7:30, as he always did. He was a man in his mid-50s, tall and lean, with grey temples and an expression of permanent thoughtfulness. His footsteps on the oak stairs were steady and measured. He nodded to Belvedere, who waited at the bottom with a barely perceptible bow. No words were needed. This dance had been performed thousands of times. In the breakfast room, morning light filtered through tall windows that overlooked the snow-covered garden. The room was painted a warm cream, and portraits of previous Sterling family members looked down from the walls with varying degrees of severity. The long table could seat 12, but this morning was set for 4, the family's usual breakfast arrangement. Silver warming dishes lined the sideboard, their domed covers hiding eggs, bacon, kippers, tomatoes, mushrooms. The scent of coffee mixed with that of toast and butter. Lady Eleanor entered moments after her husband, her silk dressing gown rustling softly. She had the kind of gentle beauty that deepened with age rather than fading, her face showing laugh lines around her eyes, her hair still dark with only the finest threads of silver. She touched her husband's shoulder briefly as she passed to her seat. A small gesture, a morning greeting performed without thought, comfortable as breathing. The children arrived in a flurry of energy barely contained by Miss Prim's presence behind them. Thomas, the elder, already had snow plans written across his face. Alice followed, her doll tucked under one arm, her hair still sleep-tangled despite the governess's best efforts. They took their seats with the kind of studied politeness that suggested Miss Prim had reminded them 3 times on the walk down. Breakfast began with the usual routine. Sir Arthur opened his newspaper, scanning the headlines that were already days old by the time the post reached them through the snow. Lady Eleanor poured tea, adding milk and sugar in the exact proportions each family member preferred without needing to ask. The children ate with focused concentration, knowing that good behavior at breakfast often led to outdoor permissions later. And then Mrs. Gable entered, her face carrying an expression that suggested something between concern and embarrassment. She approached Belvedere, speaking in low tones. The butler's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. He cleared his throat, a small sound, polite, but everyone at the table looked up. Mrs. Gable stepped forward, wringing her hands in her apron. She announced, with clear reluctance, that there had been a small domestic crisis. The key to the preserves cupboard had gone missing. Not lost forever, she was certain, simply misplaced. But misplaced enough that breakfast would proceed without Sir Arthur's customary strawberry jam for his toast. The room fell silent. Sir Arthur lowered his newspaper slowly. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Lady Eleanor's lips twitched slightly, fighting a smile. The children looked at each other, recognizing the significance. Their father's attachment to his morning jam was legendary in the household. Not dramatic, not volatile, simply a quiet preference elevated to ritual by decades of repetition. Sir Arthur folded his newspaper with great care. He placed it beside his plate. He looked at his toast, golden and butter melted, waiting for the jam that would not come. A long moment passed. Finally, he spoke. His voice was measured, controlled, holding back what might have been called disappointment, but was really something closer to philosophical resignation. He stated that he supposed he would survive, that many men had faced greater hardships, that this too would pass. Mrs. Gable assured him they were looking, that the key would turn up, that if not, they would have the lock picked by afternoon. Sir Arthur nodded. He lifted his toast. He ate it without jam, and somehow the simple act felt brave. But the key's absence had set something in motion. The children, sensing adventure, immediately volunteered to search. Alice announced they would become detectives. Thomas agreed, adding that they would track the key like hunters in the wilderness. Miss Prim, seeing an opportunity for an indoor activity that might tire them sufficiently, agreed to supervise the search. The breakfast room emptied quickly after that, the children's energy spilling into the hallway, their voices echoing up toward the high ceilings as they discussed search strategies. Sir Arthur retreated to his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, its windows looking out over the snow-covered east lawn. He settled into his chair with a book on Roman history, but his eyes kept drifting to the window, to the endless snow, to the strange quiet that had settled over everything. The absence of jam had rattled something loose in his thoughts. How much of life consisted of small rituals? How much comfort came from these predictable pleasures? He found himself thinking about routine and disruption, about how the smallest changes could reveal the structures that held a life together. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable enlisted the scullery maid and the undercook in a thorough search of her domain. Every drawer opened, every cupboard checked. The key had been there yesterday. She was certain she could picture it hanging on its little hook by the pantry door. But today, nothing. The hook hung empty. She retraced her movements from the previous day, trying to remember if she'd removed it for any reason. Nothing came to mind. The mystery deepened. Meanwhile, the children's search spread through the ground floor like water finding its level. They checked under cushions, behind portraits, in the umbrella stand. Alice invented elaborate theories about key-stealing mice. Thomas countered with the possibility of a Keating ghost. Miss Prim followed behind, ensuring nothing was damaged in their enthusiasm, while secretly enjoying their creativity. The search gave the morning a sense of purpose, a small mission that unified the household in unexpected ways. By mid-morning, the manor had settled into an unusual rhythm. The missing key had become a gentle obsession, a puzzle that occupied minds and filled conversations. In the servants' hall, speculation ran wild. Young Thomas, the footman, suggested it had fallen into something. The chambermaid wondered if it had been accidentally carried to another room. Everyone had a theory. No one had a solution, and then came a knock at the front door. Heavy, authoritative. The kind of knock that suggested official business or urgent news. Belvedere moved through the entrance hall with his usual dignity, though something in his posture suggested curiosity. Visitors did not come through 3 days of snow without good reason. He opened the door to reveal a small man, almost entirely covered in snow, carrying a leather case that was bound with straps and buckles. The man stamped his feet on the stone step, dislodging white clumps. He announced himself as Mr. Treble, the piano tuner from the village. He had been sent for 3 weeks prior, before the snow had begun, and despite the weather, he had kept his appointment. The piano in the music room required attention. The humidity from the snow would affect its tuning. He would need to begin immediately. Belvedere showed him in, taking his snow-covered coat and hat, revealing a thin man with wild grey hair and spectacles that magnified his eyes to an alarming degree. Mr. Treble surveyed the entrance hall with quick, darting glances. He clutched his leather case to his chest. He announced, with great seriousness, that tuning a piano was not merely technical work, it was an art. A delicate art that required absolute silence. The smallest extraneous sound could throw off his ear. He would need the household to operate in virtual silence for the duration of his work. Perhaps 2 hours, perhaps 3. The piano would tell him when it was ready. A ripple of understanding passed through the household as Belvedere conveyed these requirements to the family and staff. Silence, absolute silence. In a house with 2 energetic children, multiple servants carrying out daily tasks, and the general creaks and groans of an old building, the challenge seemed impossible. But Sir Arthur, perhaps seeking distraction from the jam crisis, declared it an interesting challenge. Lady Eleanor agreed, seeing an opportunity for the children to learn patience. Miss Prim turned it into a game, challenging Thomas and Alice to move like spies through enemy territory. The children's eyes lit up with the thrill of it. Silent spies, secret agents, This was better than a key hunt. And so the manor entered what would later be remembered as the silent hours. Mr. Treble settled in the music room with his tools and his tuning forks, and the household tiptoed around him like dancers in a strange ballet. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable abandoned her plan to chop vegetables for the stew. Too much noise. Instead, she began preparations for soup, stirring slowly, carefully, each motion considered for its acoustic impact. The clock in the hall ticked on, suddenly louder than anyone had ever noticed before. The children took to the challenge with surprising dedication. They invented hand signals. They communicated in exaggerated whispers. They moved through the corridors with elaborate stealth, pressing themselves against walls, peering around corners. Thomas forgot himself once and laughed, but Alice's quick elbow to his ribs reminded him of their mission. They became shadows, ghosts, silent witnesses to the household's unusual day. Belvedere removed his shoes, padding through the house in his stocking feet. The footman followed suit. Even the maids, polishing silver in the butler's pantry, worked with cloth-muffled movements, their usual chatter replaced by concentrated quiet. The house held its breath. Every door closed with careful slowness, every footstep placed with precision. The snow outside continued its silent fall, and inside, the manor matched its quietude. Lunch was a surreal affair. The family gathered in the dining room, but the usual conversation was absent. They ate soup, chosen specifically for its silence-friendly nature. Spoons touched bowls with the softest possible clinks. No one spoke above a whisper. Thomas accidentally dropped his spoon, and the clatter seemed like a thunderclap. Everyone froze. From the music room came a discordant note, a ping of irritation. They waited. After a moment, the careful plinking of piano keys resumed. Disaster averted. Sir Arthur found himself oddly at peace with the silence. Without conversation to occupy his mind, he noticed things. The way afternoon light, diffused through snow clouds, painted the walls in shades of blue-grey. The pattern of frost forming at the window's edges. The weight of the silver spoon in his hand. Small things usually lost in the rush of normal living. There was something meditative about the forced quiet, something that asked him to simply be present rather than planning or remembering or worrying. Lady Eleanor experienced something similar. She sat in the drawing room after lunch, a book open on her lap but unread. The silence wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Her mind, usually occupied with household management and social obligations, found space to simply wander. Thoughts drifted through like clouds, some pleasant, some melancholy, all allowed to pass without judgment or engagement. She realized she could not remember the last time she had simply sat without purpose. The absence of jam seemed less tragic now. Perhaps small disruptions were blessings in disguise, forcing pauses that would never otherwise occur. The children, after their initial enthusiasm, found their energy naturally winding down. The constant vigilance required to maintain silence was exhausting. They retreated to the nursery, where Miss Prim had created a fort from cushions and blankets. Inside their soft-walled refuge, they whispered stories to each other, inventing elaborate scenarios involving silent kingdoms and whisper magic. Eventually, their whispers grew softer, their eyes grew heavy, and in the warm, dim nest of pillows, both children drifted into afternoon sleep, curled together like puppies. The manor floated through the afternoon in its unusual suspension. Time seemed to slow. The snow continued falling. The light gradually shifted from midday brightness to the softer glow of late afternoon. In the music room, Mr. Treble worked with intense focus, his ear pressed close to the strings. his tuning hammer making tiny adjustments, each one followed by a gentle strike of a key and a long, listening silence. The piano was coming into alignment, slowly, carefully, each note finding its true voice. And then, as the grandfather clock prepared to strike 3, there came a final, definitive chord from the music room. Mr. Treble emerged, his wild hair even more disordered, his spectacles slightly askew, but his face bearing an expression of deep satisfaction. He announced to Belvedere that the instrument was perfection, absolute perfection. The humidity had been accounted for, the tension balanced, every note true. He gathered his tools, accepted his coat, and departed back into the snow from which he had emerged, leaving behind a house that could finally breathe freely again. The release was palpable. Voices rose to normal levels. Footsteps fell without careful placement. The children woke from their nap and immediately began chattering, as if making up for lost hours of silence. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable resumed her chopping, the rhythmic thunk of knife on board a welcome return to normalcy. The manor exhaled, but something had shifted. The enforced silence had left its mark. Everyone moved a bit more slowly, spoke a bit more softly. The frantic energy of morning had been replaced by a calm that felt earned. Sir Arthur emerged from his study looking more rested than he had in weeks, despite having done nothing but read. Lady Eleanor's face carried a serenity that suggested internal knots had loosened. Even the servants seemed less harried, moving through their tasks with renewed patience. And then Mrs. Gable appeared in the drawing room, her face flushed with triumph and embarrassment in equal measure. She had found the key. It had been in the pocket of her gardening coat, which she had worn briefly yesterday morning when checking the kitchen herb boxes in the conservatory. She had completely forgotten. The key had been there all along, waiting in a coat that had no business being worn in winter, but which Mrs. Gable kept on a hook by the garden door out of habit. She apologized profusely, her hands twisting in her apron, expecting reproach. But Sir Arthur simply smiled. He declared that all was well, that adventures had occurred because of the missing key, that the house had learned something about silence, and most importantly, that tea could now proceed with proper jam. The crisis, such as it was, had resolved itself. Tea was laid out in the drawing room, a proper, formal affair with a good china and silver service. Mrs. Gable, perhaps feeling guilty, had prepared an array of treats: scones with clotted cream, small sandwiches with cucumber and watercress, delicate cakes iced in pastel shades, and there, in a crystal bowl, the strawberry jam that had begun the day's small adventure. Sir Arthur spread it on a scone with exaggerated care, took a bite, and pronounced it worth waiting for. Everyone laughed. The sound was warm and genuine, filling the room. Lady Eleanor moved to the piano. She lifted the cover from the keys, running her fingers across them lightly. Then she began to play, something simple, a folk melody from her childhood, learned so long ago the notes came without thought. The piano sang with perfect clarity, each note pure and true. Mr. Treble's work evident in every sound. The music floated through the manor, drifting up staircases and down hallways, reaching into every corner. It was not a performance, simply an offering, a way to fill the space that silence had opened. The children sat on the floor near the fire, listening. Thomas leaned against Alice, both of them still sleepy from their nap. Their earlier energy had transformed into contentment. They watched the flames dance, listened to the music, felt the warmth envelop them. Outside, the snow continued its patient work, adding depth to the valley's white covering. But inside, Everything was exactly as it should be. As afternoon gave way to evening, the manor settled into its nighttime routine. Fires were banked. Lamps were lit in the hallways. The children were taken up for their bath, their protests about bedtime perfunctory and easily overcome by the day's accumulated weariness. Sir Arthur retreated to the library with his Roman history. Lady Eleanor finished her tea and then joined him, sitting in the companion chair, her own book open but frequently ignored in favor of simply watching the fire. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable prepared a cold supper for the family, as was customary on Sunday evenings. Simple fare, sliced ham and cheese, fresh bread, pickles from the summer's preserves, accessed now with the recovered key. The servants ate their own meal in the servants' hall, the conversation easy and punctuated by laughter. The day had been unusual, certainly, but it had also been oddly pleasant. They would remember it. The grandfather clock marked 9 with its sonorous chimes. In the nursery, both children slept deeply, their dreams presumably filled with spies and silent adventures. Miss Prim sat in her small adjoining room, writing letters by lamplight, occasionally pausing to look out at the snow that showed no signs of stopping. 3 days of snow, perhaps 4, perhaps a week, but they had everything they needed. The manor was self-sufficient. Time did not press here the way it did in the rushing world beyond the gates. Sir Arthur closed his book, marking his place with a leather bookmark worn soft with use. He looked across at his wife, found her already watching him, smiled without needing to speak. They rose together, performed the ritual of checking doors and windows, extinguishing lamps, climbing the broad staircase to their room. Behind them, the house settled into its nighttime creaks and sighs. The sounds of old wood adjusting to temperature changes, of stones settling further into their centuries-old positions. In their room, heavy curtains were already drawn against the night. The fire in the grate burned low but steady. Lady Eleanor sat at her dressing table, unpinning her hair with practiced motions, while Sir Arthur stood at the window, parting the curtains slightly to look out. The snow fell through lamplight from the lower windows, each flake briefly illuminated before disappearing into the accumulated depth below. The world was white and black and silent, perfect, complete, requiring nothing from anyone. He let the curtain fall, turned back to the room. The warmth, the familiar comfort of space shared for decades. Small rituals performed without thought. The turning down of lamps, the arrangement of pillows, the settling into bed with synchronized sighs that spoke of comfort found. They did not speak. There was nothing that needed saying. The day had been unusual. Tomorrow would return to normal. But perhaps something would remain. Perhaps the quiet that had been forced upon them would linger. A gift given by a concentric piano tuner and a misplaced key. The manor dreamed its ancient dreams. Stone walls held warmth against the cold. Fires burned low in grates. Snow continued its patient accumulation. In the valley, nothing moved, nothing rushed. Time stretched and slowed and became something other than the ticking of clocks. It became the rhythm of breath, the gentle descent of snow, the crackling of embers in the dark. The piano stood silent in the music room, perfectly tuned, waiting for morning when fingers would again draw music from its keys. The jam sat in its cupboard, the key hanging safely on its hook. The children slept their innocent sleep, their bodies loose and trusting. The servants rested in their rooms, content with work done well. Sir Arthur's breathing deepened into sleep, his face relaxing into an expression of peace. Lady Eleanor followed moments later, her hand resting on the pillow between them, an unconscious gesture of connection. and through it all, the snow fell, silent, endless, patient beyond all human understanding. It covered the gardens and the drive. It accumulated on windowsills and rooftops. It erased the division between earth and sky, creating a world of soft white unity. The manor stood within it, a pocket of warmth and light, a refuge against the cold, exactly as it had stood for centuries, and would stand for centuries more, unchanging, reliable, safe. The night deepened. Stars emerged between clouds, their light reflecting off the snow-covered valley, creating a luminescence that was neither day nor night, but something in between. An owl called from the woods beyond the garden, its voice carrying across the silent landscape. No answer came. The owl called again, then fell silent. Even the creatures of the night understood the hush that snow demanded. Inside Oakwood Manor, every living thing rested. Dreams unfolded behind closed eyes. Memories mixed with imagination. The day's events replayed and transformed into strange narratives that would be forgotten by morning. But the feeling would remain. The sense of peace earned through disruption. The knowledge that silence could be a gift rather than an absence. That small crises could bring households together rather than driving them apart. That a missing key and an eccentric tuner could conspire to create something unexpected and valuable. The fire in the main hearth, carefully banked for the night, glowed with deep red embers. Each one held concentrated heat, released slowly through the long night hours. The light they cast was minimal but somehow significant. A reminder that warmth persisted even in darkness, that care taken in small tasks created comfort that lasted. The grandfather clock marked midnight with 12 deep chimes. The sound traveled through the sleeping house, more felt than heard by those within their dreams. The turning of days, the continuation of time, but time had lost its urgency here. It simply was, present but not demanding, passing but not pressing, and still the snow fell. It had been falling when the manor woke. It fell as the household moved through its unusual day. It fell as tea was served and piano played. It fell as everyone found their beds, and it fell now through the deepest part of night, each flake adding to what had come before, building depth, creating silence, making the world new while leaving everything fundamentally unchanged. In the valley, wrapped in white, held in winter's gentle grip, Oakwood Manor rested. Stone and wood and glass, fire and warmth and light, people and purpose and peace. All of it contained within walls that had stood against centuries of weather, that would stand against centuries more. A refuge, a haven, a place where time moved differently, where small dramas played out with grace, where silence could be discovered even in the midst of living. The manor breathed through the night, steady, certain, eternal in its temporary way. And those within its walls breathed with it, held safe, wrapped in comfort, drifting through dreams toward morning. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it from this foundation of rest, from this moment of peace, from this night of snow and silence and strawberry jam finally found. The world turned, the snow fell, and at Oakwood Manor, everything was exactly, perfectly, completely as it should be.